Welcome back to another video in our Basics of Bubble series. Now in the last few videos we've looked at 3 out of the 4 fundamental no-code pillars and how you can apply them in Bubble. We've taken a look specifically at databases, we've looked at UI and UX, and of course we've explored workflows. Now in this next video we're going to explore the 4th and final of the no-code fundamental pillars and how you can use it in Bubble. And of course I'm talking about APIs and integrations. And unsurprisingly, like everything else, Bubble is insanely powerful and flexible here. I'm going to show you not only how you can make an API call out to an external service, but how you can bring data from an external service back into Bubble, use it here, and then we'll also look at setting up webhooks here in Bubble, and I'll also show you the Zapier integration. So there's a lot to cover, let's get started. Now, a few things to know before you begin. First of all, to enable your API settings, you're going to have to come into this little settings menu here. You're going to have to enable the workflow API and backend workflows, and you're also going to want to enable the data API. Now you need a paid Bubble plan to make full use of these, but to give you a little bit of an idea about what they actually do, the workflow API and backend workflows will let you kick off workflows within your Bubble app from an external service. So you could have somebody, for example, who uses a webhook that you've set up here in Bubble, and that kicks off some kind of workflow in your Bubble app to do something. You can also set up the data API here, which will let an external service or an external user come in via API and query all of the data that you've got in your Bubble database. So here, for example, we could have somebody look at the dogs database if they wanted to get information on our dogs. They could also pull out information on the ratings, and of course we can also allow them access to users. You can configure all of that in terms of what specific access people have, but those are the two base things you need to get in and out of Bubble. It doesn't of course stop you making a call outwards, but it is the part that you need if people are going to be kind of sending data back and forth. And at any point you can generate a new API key down here, and use that for making whatever calls you need to make. So beyond that, a lot of the work we're going to do then clearly takes place in the workflows tab. And a couple of things to talk about here. So first of all, when we differentiate APIs and integrations, as we've talked about, APIs are something that are going to let you take information from an external source, take action on an external source, etc. Typically, when you're making an API call, you're going to need to know all sorts of details like what URL are you hitting, what parameters are you sending, what headers are you hitting, etc. And we covered all of this in the no-code fundamentals videos when we looked at APIs. Of course, the thing to bear in mind though is typically you're going to have a full integration, which is essentially when a no-code tool has already kind of made the APIs calls for you. They've wrapped it up in a nice little interface, and you can just go and directly work with things. And so because Bubble has such a massive plugins marketplace, typically a lot of this is done for you. For example, I've already went and installed the Airtable plugin, which means rather than me having to worry about how to use Airtable's API, Bubble has already got a direct integration. I don't even need to go through Zapier, and so I can just start sending data back and forth. Now, if you've seen any of the other basics videos that we've done, we've got this little API test table here on Airtable. I've also set up this Zapier webhook where it's just got a basic, API URL, and that's it there. And I can send the word tool, the parameter tool and the parameter message, and those will then be recorded here in the respective tool and message fields in Airtable. It's just a really, really basic way to try out, putting data in here, pulling it out without having to make it fit Rate My Doggy or any other concept we've explored in the basics videos. So what we're going to do is, I've already got this Airtable one installed. As I say, I'm not going to show you the page because my API key is there and we never share our API keys. But what I will do is show you how I can actually make use of that Airtable API. So, as you know, in workflows here in Bubble, they're always kicked off from the front end. So let's make a quick little button that we can just hit repeatedly that will kick off an API. Again, you could do this with a back-end trigger or something like that, but just to keep it simple, we'll do make an API call. And the minute I hit start/edit workflow and come in here, this is where I can start to show you some of the cool stuff that Bubble can do. So let's start we'll just create a new thing. And I've made a little table earlier while I was testing for this called API storage. I'll delete that and just show you it again, show you how it works. So I've got API storage, we'll create that. And that's just going to store various bits of data that we send back and forth with our API. If I create a new field, I'll just do the same as what I've got in Airtable. So I'll do message, we'll do text, and we'll do tool, which will also be text as well. Nothing too complex in here, although clearly you could use whatever you wanted to use. So we've got this new database alongside dogs and ratings. It's got message as a field, it's got tool as a field, exactly like this here. So if I now go back to my workflow and I create a new thing, I'm going to create a new API storage, and I'm going to add all the fields. So I can add message, I can add tool, and watch this. So when I go into the bubble variable menu, you probably have seen this before in previous videos. We've got this little section that says get data from an external API, and when I click that, it comes up and asks me, well, who's the API provider? And I click that, and I've immediately got a couple of options here. I can hit get bubble plugins, or I can hit Airtable table 1. Now what this is actually referring to is the API plugin that I already downloaded for Airtable and installed. And in fact, you've got this little section here that says add more APIs. If I click that, it's going to take me to the Bubble marketplace and let me navigate all sorts of different APIs for every use case under the sun. All sorts of stuff here, Africa SMS, Agora streaming, we've got Airtable, which of course I've installed. You know, literally, if it exists, there is probably a plugin of it here in the Bubble marketplace. So you can install all sorts of these stuff, and then rather than having to worry about the API call, it will just pop up here and let you put stuff in. So when I go get information, I'm going to use Airtable in this specific instance. And again, the same as if you're searching your own database for data, you can set up different restraints here about what data gets sent back from Airtable, and you can do a different sort by, etc. I'm just going to close that, and then I'll have a little look in here. So this is asking me to specify, right, okay, well, if you're taking the message from Airtable, where specifically though are you taking it from? So I can do things that I can say, okay, I want to take the last item in the database, which of course is something that says glide and bench press. If you're wondering what that is, we built a workout app in the basics of glide tutorial series, so that's why that's in there. But I can do last item, and I can say, all right, we'll take the message from there. So this is saying, make an API call to Airtable, take the last item and grab the message field. Now, if you're wondering how it knows all that already, when I've set up the Airtable plugin, it's asked me to put in the name of my base, and it's also asked me to put in my Airtable API key. So I immediately can go in, I can pull that information through because the integration is so tight, and I've got it there just like that. I can also go for tools. I can say, right, get data from external API, take that from Airtable. I don't want to filter or anything like that, so we're just going to say, without any filters or sorting, just take the last item and take that last item's tool. And you'll also notice we've got the Airtable record ID available. We've got when received, which of course is this last field here. So everything's pulling through nice and easy. But I'm just going to hit tool, and I can do other things there again as per usual if I want, but I'll stick with tool. We'll hit that. And so right off the bat, that's kind of as simple as you need to do. You know, I could just quickly go here. Here, I refresh my page. That workflow is set up. Let it pull through. Scroll down past all the dogs, hit make an API call. And you saw a little bar going there, which is Bubble's way of telling me something happened. So let's go and check our database. Check our app data. Now, if you remember from previous videos, this usually doesn't load up, but there we go. We've immediately pulled data through from the API. And you can see the time matches up, 124, it's currently 124. And we pulled data through from our Airtable database. Now it looks like we've pulled it the other way around. I did specify the last item, but it appears to have pulled the first item. Fair enough, maybe it's doing them back to front, maybe it's just the way it's sorting it. But ultimately, we've pulled data through. And you could go in, what we call it, last item, yeah, it looks like we've probably, it looks like it's probably reading the database front to back rather than the way around, but that's okay. So, in essence, that is how you can pull external data. But let's say you didn't have a Bubble plugin. What would you have to do? Well, let me show you. If we pop down to plugins here, there is a lovely plugin I can download from Bubble, which is, you know, specifically made by Bubble. It's not a third party, and it's called the API connector. Here it is here. This is mega popular. This is the hub of how most API stuff happens in Bubble. So you come in here, it says API lets you define your own API calls directly in the Bubble editor and use them in your apps. It says a good practice is to get the calls to work in Postman first and then add them here. Postman, if you don't already know, is a tool for making API calls outside of any no-code stuff. It just lets you do it. I like a tool called Hopscotch. I demoed that in the API fundamentals, but essentially what Bubble's saying is test out the API call on some other tool, make sure it works, and then write it down here in Bubble. And I'll show you why that is, because if I hit add another API, I've essentially got to specify the API call, and then I can use it in my workflows. So we're gonna connect here to this Zapier one. Let me show you how this works. And by the way, you can use this, I'll show you in a wee second, but you can use this both for pulling out data or for creating it in action. So we'll call this one send Zapier, whoops, hit caps there, send Zapier data. Of course, I've got lots of authentication options here. Some of them you'll recognise, some of them you won't. If you don't recognise any, it probably means you've not watched the API fundamentals video, so definitely recommend doing that or you're going to struggle a little bit. Shared headers and parameters, let me come back to that in a second, because the way that this works is under a single API heading, such as send Zapier data, you essentially can make as many different calls as you like. So I've got this one here, a pre-made API call. I'll change that to okay, I'm not changing that because it doesn't appear to be letting me for some reason. I think that's a bug on my side because I've played with this before and could change it. Oh, there we go. It's just because I hadn't expanded it. So if I hit expand there, we'll say send Zapier call. And there's some stuff in here that you should be familiar with. I can choose between a get, a post, a put patch, etc. I'll just leave it as get. I can choose here, this is what I said to pay attention to. I can choose here this little bit, use as data or action. So if I want to get data from an external API, the way that I just did with Airtable, if I leave it as this, then what we're building here, this API call we're making, will show up as an option in that little workflow menu here. So it would show up, when I go to here. It's not showing up yet because I've not finished creating it yet. But if I want to use it as an action in my workflow, something that I can, being able to make a call outwards to an external API, then I can simply hit action. And I'm going to go to Zapier and grab my webhook URL. If you were using anything else, let's say, for example, you were editing the Webflow API, then of course you'd be going to api.webflow.io or whatever else your specific service says in the documentation. Now I can add headers if I want them. I personally don't for this particular call because I don't need them. And I can specify, what's the kind of body type, etc. If you don't know what that means, you probably don't need to use it. Same with this data type up here. Typically, JSON or JSON as I pronounce it, and many people do. Typically, that is the default. So we're going to add parameters, and of course, if I quickly check this, we do have our default parameters of tool and message. And so I'm going to add tool. And I'll say the tool is bubble. We add a parameter and we'll say message, and the value is hello, this is a message from bubble. So what I'm expecting is when I make this API call, what I've just written there is going to show up here. And so we have this little button here that says initialize call. What's going to happen here is Bubble's going to attempt to make the API call once. Once it successfully makes it, it will come back and confirm to us that we're good to use it, and we can then pull it into workflows, and something else happens. Let me show you. So if I hit initial call, what I now get is the returned values. So if I was to make a call, whoops, let me do that again. If I was to make a call to Zapier, then each of these little parameters is what Zapier sends back. So the key is status, the message is success. The key is attempt, the message is whatever that is, so on and so forth. Now, a lot of that, when you're making a call to Zapier's API specifically, doesn't really matter. And remember, I'm only making a call to Zapier because it's the easiest way for me to make a generic webhook. In practice, if you wanted to work with Zapier, you would probably use the Zapier integration that we'll come to in a minute. And of course, in practice, you'll probably be using a different service yourself, so you'll get different values back. You might query an API through a Bubble here to get car information, and you might start to get values back that say, make BMW, model 320, number of seats in car 4, number of wheels on car also 4, so on and so forth. But Essentially what happens is Bubble will then let you access each of these variables within their dynamic data list as you go through workflows, which is why you can specify, how is it coming back? Do you want to just ignore it? Do you want to take it as text? So on and so forth. So I'm going to save that. And immediately that API call is now ready to go. I can add another call if I like, but they're all grouped under this one API heading. And so when I mentioned earlier that I'd come back to shared parameters, essentially if I want to make multiple calls that are all slightly different, let's say for example I had the Webflow API that we used in the fundamental series. Imagine I wanted to create a new item in my Webflow CMS. I wanted to delete one, I wanted to read it, I wanted to update it. I could have shared parameters here for getting to the collection. I could have a shared header for all my authentication, and then I could make 4 different calls, one for reading the data, one for updating it, one for creating it, one for deleting it, so on and so forth. So that just saves you a little bit of time. That's what the shared headers and parameters are. They'll be used across every call that you add in here like that as you go down. But anyway, we're quite happy with the Zapier one that we've got. So let me go ahead and show you how this works. If I pop back to my workflow, and this is pretty simple by the way, now that we've set that up, I can just do a click here to add another action. I can go down to my plugins and you'll see this now says send Zapier data - send Zapier call. In other words, if I pop back and double check that, I've got send Zapier data, which is the name of my overall little API connection I've made here. And then I've got the specific call we're going to make, which is send Zapier call. Similarly, if I had another one there that said delete Zapier call or send another Zapier call, whatever I might call it, then that will show up here as well. So, that will show up here as well. So, nothing too much to configure there because you've configured it all already in the plugins menu. You can simply do the usual only when check. But other than that, that will send some more data. So if I go and delete this one this time, and we'll just leave that as a single thing in our workflow, then I'm expecting, that message is already shown up because we've initialized the call a couple of times. Let's delete it. So that's completely gone. Let's delete it, hit our little button that we've got here and see if it works. So we should see Bubble and hello, this is a message from Bubble showing up in Airtable. You can see there's nothing there. The page is just reloading. All right, let's make an API call. And it should be showing up any minute now, and there you go, immediately. And by the way, I talked about in the last video about how quick computers move and how obvious that is, and yet how much it can surprise you. In the time that it took me to switch from that tab to that tab, Bubble literally went through that workflow, sent that message to Zapier. Zapier sent that message probably, across a country to Airtable. Airtable put it in there in the blink of an eye. API calls work incredibly quickly. Typically, an API call is judged to be normal sort of speed if it occurs in 100 microseconds. So essentially that is a tenth of a second is how quick it should take an API call to happen, which I believe is faster than the human eye can register change, but don't quote me on that. So that is how we send an API call and how we also receive data. Let me show you 2 more things. Number 1, I want to show you a little plugin, which is the Zapier plugin. So at any time, if you want to actually integrate with Zapier directly, you can grab this plugin here, you can hit install, and you can come in and you can add another Zap trigger. You can create the name of a Zap trigger. So I could say, when new dog added, and I can say, right, that's going to trigger on dogs. And that's kind of all I set up there. Because what I then do is, if I look at my Zapier integration, I've got this trigger, it will say new workflow trigger event. So if I set that up, I would then pop into my workflow, I would click here, I would go to my plugins, I would do trigger a Zapier Zap, I would pick it when new dog added, which is the one I just made. I could pass around some data to it, so I could say, right, send the dogs from this, repeating data group, whatever, current list of dogs, whatever it needs to be. I could do a search if I wanted, whatever. But that data is then available within my Zap. So I'll be able to use that, and then I'll be able to just it would come in a trigger field like this, and I can just do whatever I want. I can send it to Airtable, I can, send it off to the other 3,000 plus applications that Zapier has on there. If I wanted to put it in Gmail, Review, Google Sheets, whatever I want to use. You do a ton there. And of course on the other side, you can also take various actions within Bubble. So you can use Zapier to create data So create a thing in Bubble. You can use it to modify a thing. So we could create a new dog. We could update a dog's rating if we're doing it to rate my doggy. And interestingly, you can also kick off an API workflow. So these are just essentially Zapier integrations that let you do all of these API actions here if you don't want to use API. So anytime Zapier can kick off any workflow you create here, and it can also modify your data. So the last thing I just want to show you then, very, very similarly, is a new API endpoint. So if I come into my backend workflows, which again should be enabled if you've clicked this, if I come into my backend workflows, I can create a new API endpoint. That's just another name for a webhook. So I can essentially just set an API up here. I can configure it. I can say, okay, make this, expose this as a public endpoint, which means anybody can find it and give it a name, my webhook. I can say, it either requires authentication, or I can say, nope, don't bother with authentication. I can put, essentially say I want parameters. I can add various parameters I want people to send. A bit like earlier, we could do a tool. We could say, right, is that a list or an array? Is that multiple things? And if you don't know what an array is, check out our data types video on the No-Code Fundamentals. You could say, is it allowed to be query string? Does it have to be a body item, etc.? So this section's a little bit advanced, but essentially you can set up a webhook however you like. You can put parameters in there and say, like, only do this when the parameter is yada yada yada. And then you can just start coming in and creating stuff. If I just add a couple of parameters, let me show you. Let's do parameter, call that parameter 1. That'll be a piece of data. Do this parameter 2. And I can just come in here, I can say, right, create a new thing, create something in API storage, set another field, right, message, what's that going to equal? Well, that's going to equal parameter 1 when it finally comes through. Message is going to equal parameter 2. So I can create this webhook. I can give the information in the webhook to anybody I like. So I could say, right, you need to send a piece of data with the key parameter 1 and the value, whatever you want, ABC, and then key parameter 2, value, whatever. I could give them that, and then they can send whatever data they want here. That will come through, and I've immediately got it in my workflow in Bubble. I can do whatever I like with it. I can check it's safe data. I can then save it in my database. I can then take actions off it. Whatever I want to do, I can do it. That is mega, mega, mega powerful. And if you're trying to figure out how to build, your own API, and you don't really want to build a website, this could be a good way to do it. You could just use Bubble. You could use Bubble itself to run your API documentation site, so the site that everybody learns how to use your API, or maybe where they can get their API keys. And then you could just build endpoints like this instead of using a tool that's a little bit more complicated like Xano. You could use this to just create various different endpoints, let people hit them, and then and run your app that way, And of course, as you've seen, Bubble interfaces with tools like Airtable, etc. So you can always have a database sitting elsewhere and just use Bubble to build an API from scratch. Really, really powerful stuff, really complicated. But complicated in the best kind of sense, where as long as you can get around that learning curve, you can really do anything you like. Now, I'm in my test version, so this will look a little bit different, but this is essentially the API URL that you would need. So in the same way that we just copy and pasted, this little URL in here to make our API call, if somebody else wanted to make an API call to my app, they would have to go to this URL here. The one that you need will be found in your own settings as well. Now clearly this is a test version because I'm still in development mode, as you can see up here, but if I was in live, it would say live and it would just let me go there. And so if I wanted to do a workflow called, I don't know, send payment information, maybe I've got somebody sending me some kind of payment information, it would be one more NCT test app.bubbleapps.io/live/API/1.1/WF and then /send payment information. So something like that, whatever you call your endpoint, you would put that in the end of this. It's really, really easy. But you can generate a whole Swagger documentation for that as well. So it's quite easy to get stuck into and get an app working. So there you have it. You now know how to make an API call in Bubble. You also know how to pull data into your Bubble from somewhere like Airtable, for example. You know how to go and grab plugins, which, by the way, is incredibly easy. Literally just a button click. You know how the Zapier integration works, and of course we've just looked at webhooks. Now, all of this, as you've seen, has a lot of depth, so if you need a little bit more information, we've got more videos on the website around about how you can do Zapier integrations, how you can get other plugins, use more complicated API calls, whatever you need. If we don't have it on NoCode.Tech, there's a good chance Bubble will have it, as I've said before. They've got an incredibly large ecosystem of documentation and a massive forum as well. So take a look, check it out, and let us know if you're building anything with APIs on Bubble. Thank you very much, and I'll see you again soon.